What's up everyone, welcome back to another video. Now yes, Alhaitham and Kazuha are both rerunning right now, and actually I'll be the first to say it. I think EroticWalruss has given us like one of the perfect opportunity to splurge a little, not real money, but gave you guys such a good banner to kind of decide if you want to invest into some of these characters. Either it's your first time picking them up or vertical investment, right? Getting constellations, getting their weapons, because you're safe from next patch. Next patch doesn't have many new characters. Right now, this is like the only time out of the entire year really where you can invest into characters that you want with close to no repercussion. Now, yes, if you're wanting to see R1, the Hydro Archon, maybe it's not a good idea to spend your resources now, but honestly, C0, even a free-to-play weapon for the Archons, is not the worst case, right? With Nahida, you didn't really need her weapon. There are plenty of other options out there. So it's going to be the same likely for Folklore. EroticWalruss continuously develop their monetization models. So rest assured that just because you can't get a C2 R1, you're going to be fine. So really, it's the golden opportunity to pick up Kazuha, maybe even a C1 for yourself if you're really feeling to ramp him up and invest him into the future, which we're going to be talking about this video about Kazuha's future in not only his elemental teams, but how he's going to potentially synergize with Fontaine and the metas that will shape up after Fontaine, post Fontaine metas. Maybe once we get into Natlan, we're going to be talking about Melt with Dendro and how Kazuha fits into that. But currently, Kazuha has really been the backbone of elemental teams. Now, a lot of people right now during this current rerun is asking, is Kazuha still going to hold this type of power going into future metas? What's coming very soon, which is Fontaine. I say that very soon, but it's still over a month away, 2-3 months, kind of 2 months. I don't know. It's still around 2 months away, roughly, give or take. So understanding that Kazuha's future really rides or die on the fact that whether or not elemental teams are still going to be relevant. Now, there is a world or a scenario where Kazuha could be slotted into a Dendro team. We'll talk about that scenario a little later, but first let's focus on the potential of elemental teams. Wow, what great timing. We talk about elemental teams, Fontaine, and it starts raining. You just can't time this any better, but let's focus on Fontaine first. What is the purpose of Fontaine? How is Fontaine and Kazuha going to synergize with each other? Fontaine is going to bring about the rise. Well, has Hydro really been out of the meta? Saying Fontaine is synonymous with saying Hydro. Hydro is going to have elevated playstyles. What does that really mean? It means that Hydro is probably going to even have better utilities and overall better character selection. The primary focus that I want to talk about is the Hydro Archon. There is no way that EroticWalruss is going to let the Hydro Archon slip away in terms of sales and usage rates. So Hydro Archon is likely going to slot right into the meta alongside characters like Nahida, Raiden Shogun, Zhongli, and Kazuha, right? So as long as we understand that, then we can start to talk about his potential. Because right now, regardless of the details as to how the Hydro Archon is going to function, it likely will apply great Hydro. And it wouldn't even be that surprising to say that Hydro likely will be the next element to have a mono team. And as with all elemental mono teams, Kazuha has been a great staple in most of them, with his ability not only to utilize the Viridescent set as well as to elevate elemental damage through his talent here, right? If you guys don't know, I mean, most of you guys should know, his second talent here, upon triggering a sword reaction, Kazuha will grant all members a 0.04% elemental damage bonus to the element absorbed by the swirl for every point of elemental mastery he has for 8 seconds. This is a very big talent people don't talk about nearly enough, and he leverages this incredibly well in mono teams, as carries are able to leverage that very well, which leads people to now think of investing into Kazuha even further. Now, this is where the conversation can get a little tricky, because I think we can end the discussion in saying, well, is Kazuha going to continue being as dominant as he is? And the answer to that, in my honest opinion, is yes, including after Fontaine, which we're moving into Natlan as well as eventually Shisnaya. These are all elemental teams that can benefit Kazuha. I did mention that even in the case of Dendro, there could be a unique scenario where Kazuha could be leveraged to bring about more power within a team comp, and that is future Melt teams. Now, currently, Melt teams could be played with Senganyu, with, let's say, Bennett, and you can also just leverage Zhangling in there as well to have even more power application. But how I've broken down Melt in the future is that you likely won't need that much pyro application. In fact, the dendro application is what it's going to hinge on, and Nahida should have that on lock. As long as you have a consistent amount of dendro applied, the burning effect will continue. Now, how influential Kazuha will be in that particular team comp, but simply ruling him out of a melt composition just seems a little odd to me. Kazuha as a character actually offers a great mixed utility of grouping enemies while also applying viridescence, whereas a character like Venti heavily focuses on the grouping aspect, and to me, viridescence seems like an afterthought. Kazuha's ability to apply viridescence consistently and without hassle has made him a crowd favorite. In fact, even in the current iteration of Abyss, where Venti in Abyss 12.1 has been heavily favored to group enemies and stop them from going underground and becoming untargetable, Kazuha still is far and above Venti in terms of just general usage. So it's without a doubt that Kazuha will continue to dominate over Venti even in the viridescence and CC department. Focusing on CC a little bit here, a lot of people would argue that, well, Sucrose can also do a similar job, whereas Venti has better CC. But you guys have to understand that Kazuha takes the best of both worlds, and the consistency he brings along with his second talent, he has just enough CC to feel like, okay, even if I cannot gather every enemy across the room into a single ball like singularity, I can still group them next to my carries and apply the elemental shred that's needed for the carries to get the rest of the job done. In fact, his elemental skill has such low cooldown and has two different ways to use it, the press and the hold. And of course, depending on whether or not I have C1, you can also leverage more range and general power with his elemental skill, or you can just use the weapon like I have here, the Sack Sword, which leads us now into his constellation discussion. I actually had people asking me, Walrus, is it a good idea to start hunting for some constellation on Kazuha? His C1, is it good? Now, Kazuha's C1, in my opinion, is somewhat underrated, but at the same time, I wouldn't really go out of my way to hunt for it. Let's say if you don't have an Alhaitham and you want to start building a Dendro team, is it better to get Kazuha C1 over investing into an Alhaitham to pair with like your Nahida and then start playing some Dendro team options? I don't think so. But what kind of scenario would lead you to want to invest into Kazuha? Because I think Kazuha C1 is good and underrated, but his C2 is where things get interesting. I think his C2 is quite fantastic. Not only does it give him more elemental mastery, with Kazuha absolutely adores, it also leverages more elemental mastery back to your team. Now, let's say if he and Nahida ever does end up on the same team, this does feel like somewhat of a diminishing return, especially if you have your Nahida sitting at like 1,000 elemental masteries. But this is one of those constellations that is quite noticeable, and in fact part of your reasoning to get Constellation 1 of Kazuha, which it's good, but it's a stepping stone towards that Constellation 2. Now, of course, you don't have to get it in one sitting. I'm not saying if you're not getting C2, don't bother with C1. C1 is still phenomenal. It actually allows you to get off of the Sack Sword and onto another sort of more substance that can leverage even more stats into his kit, which eventually bleeds into the rest of your team. So by all means, you can start hunting for this Constellation right now, and maybe in the future, at a timely rerun, hunt for that C2, and you're definitely going to feel it. This is one of those great constellations that people don't talk about enough because Kazuha C0 is just so damn busted. And this kind of is like a case of suffering from success. When a character at C0 with free-to-play weapon is so damn strong and consistently sitting at the top, why would anyone ever urge you to get his constellations? This is kind of the scenario that we're setting up, right? Imagine if you were to get Kazuha C0 and you're just winning hard. You already won big. Why would you invest more into him to get back less returns comparative to when you first got him at C0? And that's how it feels like recommending Kazuha constellations. They're not bad per se. In fact, they're some of the better designed constellations we have in the game, but it's just like spending any more than you need on Kazuha feels quite wasteful in the sense that he is already so damn good. Why would you need to pile on more? I hope I'm getting the point across, because I know there's going to be people in the comment sections like, Walrus, it's a terrible idea recommending constellations for Kazuha. He is so broken at C0. Why waste your resources when you can pull characters like Ayaka? Like, if you want to waste it, why don't you go pull someone like Shinhe? Why don't you pull someone like Yai Miko per se, right? It's just, why would you ever put that into a constellation, let alone a Kazuha constellation. But people, you just don't understand. I've had the pleasure of playing my C0 Kazuha, but I also have tried a Kazuha going from C1 all the way to C6, and I'm telling you, it doesn't get much better than C2 Kazuha. C1 Kazuha is a great utility constellation, but C2 is where you really feel it ramping up. C6, it turns him into like a solo DPS, like a Nemo DPS type deal. Will be actually great with Faruzan, but let's just leave that for another time. But for the people who are wondering, upgrading Kazuha isn't really out of the question. I actually think that it's very smart for people to start investing more into Kazuha, especially like I mentioned with the Hydro region, the Pyro region, and the Cryo region coming in the future. Do you guys honestly think that elemental teams are going anywhere? I don't think so. In the future, Mono Hydro is going to be a thing, Mono Pyro is going to be a thing, and guess who's going to be sitting right there supporting both of those mono team compositions? Your guess is as good as mine. That's going to be that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until the next one, remember to stay safe. Peace, bye.